Every one of us has goals. Every human shares one goal, and that is to be happy. Goals are things that keep you focused on the process of achieving them and push you to try your hardest. The best way of organizing, not forgetting, and just being able to really look at your goals is to write them down. If you're someone like me, then you probably like the satisfaction of checking the box after you finally achieved your goal. It's the feeling of moving forward and actually progressing. They don't need to be big, but big goals, the impossible, unachievable goals, are what really pushes you the most, what makes you want them even more. Goals in fitness are especially important. They keep you motivated. If you have already achieved any of your goals, then you know that the feeling when you finally achieve them, even though nobody expected you to, when even you thought you can do it and the only two things why you did it were because you believed in yourself and trained your ass off, is amazing. But never overtrain or overwork yourself. That may lead to a burnout, loss of motivation, and may cause some injuries. Listen to your body. Take rest days if you need them. I highly recommend the 2-day rule, of which I learned from Mediavella and have been using for maybe a year now. The 2-day rule means you should only take a break for 1 day. You can train as many days as you want, but when taking a break, you should only take a break for 1 day. That should keep the momentum and stop you from breaking the habit. As Mediavella said, if you take a break for more than 1 day, you're most likely to take a break for 3, 4, 5 or even more days. Of course, if your body is telling you to take a rest for more than 1 day, then do it. If it's only mental, then take a maximum break of 1 day. It's really about the practice of your willpower and tricking yourself into doing that thing. Somewhere inside you, you know you really want to do it, but you can't, or you're just too tired, you don't have enough time, and to be honest, that's all just bullshit. If you want it, and you really do, get up, stop making excuses and do it. It's all in your mind. It's like a war zone between I want to do it and the but. And when you finally get to the part where you started, it feels amazing. If it doesn't, it should at least feel amazing after you're done with your workout. If it still doesn't feel amazing after the workout, you're probably doing something wrong. The trick of achieving your goals and staying motivated is tricking your mind into liking hard things and challenges. One day you will get to the point when exercising or any other habit is just part of your life and you can't imagine living without it.